So one of the benefits is obviously that it lets us transcend the borders of the self. So in the Ballad of Reading Jail, Oscar Wilde wrote about drugs. And what he said was that certain kinds of drugs were an unlocked door in the prison of identity that leads to the prison yard. So there is a certain kind of freedom in living online that you don't have in meat space. And not to spend your entire life there, not to be ignorant of the consequences, not to lose affect and think, because I play this shoot-'em-up video game, that violence has no content, no consequence, even a consequence for me. But to allow me actually to experience things and learn from that experience without being destroyed by them. So when I went to university, that's what it was. It worked in loco parentis. It was like a sandbox. And you could do things, you could make mistakes, and you could learn from those mistakes. Whereas if you had to do them for real, you'd probably not get the chance to learn. At best, you would become a cautionary tale for somebody else. So one of the benefits of cyber life is that it allows you to simulate real life. So when you can't, by reason, come to a logical or rigorous conclusion, you can, by simulation, explore the boundaries of what is possible. And you can then know what assumptions to make in your research, what kinds of advice to give. Because rarely can you say, this is the right policy to follow. You can say, this looks like it might not be too bad, but we don't know. So do this thing, and then collect this information, study what actually happens. And that ability to experiment, I think, is wonderful. Mm-hmm. One final thing is that we have several global challenges, right? The aging of the population, the warming of the climate, the way in which immigration functions. So, I mean, that's a very pressing thing. And particularly when I sit in a civilization like Japan, where the demographics is not relieved by flows of immigration, I have to think about these things. So at one time, when I was growing up in America, I believed that everybody who came from India had a PhD and was an engineer, because there were lots of Indians coming in all the time, and they all had PhDs and were engineers. And they all, therefore, participated in the same cultural assumptions, scientific and technical assumptions, as my dad did. And therefore, it was easy to believe in the universality of human existence, but in a very reductive sense. Not that it's rich and universal, but that it's very particular and it looks like, an academic sort of thing. So the variety of human experience, the fact that you can experiment with being different kinds of people, I think is a tremendous thing. So one very concrete example is disability. There are all kinds of disabilities, many of them cognitive, that are only thrown into relief by being in a cyber society. So things, for example, like Alzheimer's or ADHD. Alzheimer's is kept at bay by human meaningful interaction, and the cyber world can provide that. ADHD or dyslexia have to do with processing systems of symbols, and varieties of human existence that would not have been pathological before become pathological online. So we get to understand them a little bit better. But if, for example, I need to understand what having a different gender is, or being physically disabled or mentally disabled, online, I can not only meet people like that, I can experience for myself what it is like to be that. And that movement from sympathy to empathy, I think, is enormously productive in building a kind of understanding that would make us not the kind of tolerant society where I say, you're like that, it's okay, you can be like that. And I look down 10 yards of nose at you because you've actually exercised the freedom that I was pleased to give you because I'm such a good guy. Right? That isn't the way human beings should interact, but it is the way even liberal and tolerant societies do. So when I lived in the Netherlands, that was very much the case. You could do whatever you wanted to do, and they would keep their own counsel about whether it was a good thing to do. But it's a very different thing to actually be, to some extent, to live that experience. And I think that, to me, that's one of the enormous potential benefits of the cyber world. Plus, everything's cheap and you can order it online. Plus, I can look up anything I want to. A complex system is a system made up of systems, and it has emergent behavior. One definition of emergent behavior is behavior that cannot be anticipated but can be predicted. So what do I mean by that? Suppose I had a clock. Everyone knows a clock goes tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. So what sound is the clock going to make at 12:38 and 22 seconds? You can't tell me. But if I tell you it just went tick, you can work out for yourself what it's going to do at each moment forever afterwards. So that one piece of information turned it from a stable indeterminacy into an absolute prediction. Now, in general, to understand or predict the behavior of a system, I may need a lot of information. It may be too much, or perhaps the fact that I'm using it means that people won't show it to me. But it may mean that I can make a prediction that's not precise, but is partial. So there's an example of this, something called a logistic oscillator that I won't explain, except that it depends on the coupling between different parts of the system. If the coupling is loose, then the system behaves in kind of monotonic fashion. You can project forward what it's going to do. If the coupling becomes tighter, then it begins to branch and different things can happen. If it becomes tighter still, there are these zones of indeterminacy. But if I'm on an upper branch and I don't know where I am, then I know for sure that on the next period I'll be on the lower branch. It may be that I'm in the high part of the lower branch so that I'm actually above where I was before, but it is in that different branch. So what I'm saying is I can make an approximate prediction of what's going to happen, and if I can approximately understand the future, I can then approximately make policy that doesn't depend on fine details that I can't know, but is a looser kind of thing. It's standards or values rather than laws or rules. And so when I think about predicting cyber civilization, I think if we give up on the attempt to control it, and rather we try to understand and reinforce the things that are good, and deal with, either by exposing or by controlling, the things that are less productive, and the things where we disagree, we talk about them on the basis of information, then I think cyber civilization can fulfill the challenge that it poses to non-cyber civilization. Because these changes are so profound, and because when you are embedded in the change, it is difficult to see a useful true shape of the change, and because each person in it will see and perceive it in a different way, I think it's absolutely essential to have a space outside of that change to which all kinds of stakeholders can come, where they can have a conversation unified only by the attempt to define what cyber civilization is. Because normally if you're living something, you don't have an attempt to see it. It only comes later, usually through humanistic disciplines, through literature and art, that we have any sense of what the civilization is. But we know that we've gotten that wrong. For example, with the Vikings, we thought the Vikings were a brutal raiding civilization. It was only much later that we discovered the intricacy and delicacy of their art, the complexity of their social structures, and so on. But I think because the changes are so fast and can become so irreversible, it's necessary to have a place out of that stream to which people can come, bringing what they know, and from which they can return, bringing the insights that they've gathered through talking to each other. So I think that a cyber civilization research center is an essential thing if the system is to become properly self-governing. Having it here at Keio University, I think is also very important, particularly because of the cultural difference that separates Japan from the other countries in Asia. Its leading role in certain aspects of the technology, but its very different human and social and political institutions, because in contrasting that with other areas, particularly when certain distorting forces, if I could put it, that would exist in places like America are muted or set to one side, a perspective can be gained on the development of cyber civilization that couldn't be done in any other place. That said, I think it would be a mistake if it were set off from other institutions. So I'm going to go back from this experience re-energized to things like the Alan Turing Institute, to say that it is okay to think about the deeper aspects of these things, the things that are not technological or economic or security driven or bound up in a legal definition of what privacy is. That at some point somebody has to think about these things. You can think about them a little bit, and there are these people you can go to talk to who will help you think about them in a better way.
Amazing. Anything else that you want to address to our audience?
Okay, yes, there are a couple of things. One is you should have the courage to think about things whose purpose you can't actually see, right? Think about things very often when you do particularly analytic things, when you see the first bits, you have a pretty good sense of where it's going to wind up. So think about things that you really don't know where they're going to wind up. And when you interact and work with each other on these problems, try not to be teleological. Try not to do it with any particular purpose in mind. Do it out of a moral duty to explore. Right? That it's that duty that we owe to each other, to your future selves, to all the stuff that you've learned. You want to give proper expression to it. So have a lot of pointless and strange conversations, and don't try to work out too soon whether they're going to be useful or whether they make sense. The other thing that I would say is you will all have different disciplinary orientations. And there's a strength in having a discipline. It doesn't mean that you own the whole problem. So there's a certain kind of interaction with people from other disciplines. It would be tempting to say we should have a cybersecurity discipline to which we can all become accredited, but you need the strength of those other rigorous ways of thought, what they consider to be evidence. You have to take them into account, but you can't entirely subsume them because that kind of joint discipline rarely has disciplinary rigor. It rarely convinces, it rarely emboldens people to act, and it rarely pulls in information that people didn't know that they knew. So there has to be this two-way flow of information in from the world, in from the disciplines to this meme of cyber civilization, and then back out into those. So I guess what I'm saying is don't abandon your disciplines. Try to develop your interests, the things that you find interesting and exciting. Because in the end, if you do it with a good will, they will build a cyber civilization. And if you don't, no matter how clever you are, they're probably not going to.